Welcome to the Faith Snacks Podcast, bite-sized snacks to grow your faith. I am your host, Chris Adams. Thank you for joining me, and let's get in today's program. Okay, we are ready to start off with principle or rule number 4, and that is the principle of history and grammar. And this rule or principle is to focus on the original meaning of Scripture to help determine what it means to us. And again, we're covering a whole lot of information in these. So let's look at this. What does this mean? Let's look at grammar. Okay, here are some things that we need to remember when dealing with grammar, and these are the things that you learned in English class. We need to learn to classify the various words and how they are combined. Identify the key parts of the sentence. Identify the tenses, the past, the present, the future. And understand about punctuation. The original text did not have punctuation. It was added during translation to try and make it clear. Sometimes it's wrong. And we also need to remember about verses and chapters. And they were added, of course, after translation as well. And we must understand that some thoughts carry through chapters and verses. Okay, now let me give you 4 guidelines for grammatical interpretation. Number 1 is to find the key word in the sentence and label it as the noun or the verb or whatever it may be. Again, stuff from English class. Number 2 is to study the relation of that word you're studying to the words around it. Number 3 is to note the possible meaning that the word may give to the passage or verse. And number 4 is if there is one or more possible meanings, use the other rules of Bible interpretation, including and specifically the rule of context. We also need to understand that there are different types of literature in the Bible. In fact, there's 3 different types of literature all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And the first one is prose. And everything that fits into that is all the history and the teaching passages. So, honestly, it's the majority of the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then there's the second one is poetry. And that would include Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, and parts of Job. And then there's the apocalyptic or prophetic literature, which has the meaning as hidden in symbols, which is Revelations, Daniel, Ezekiel, actually a good part of the Old Testament as well, with the minor and the major prophets. And all of these, no matter what kind it is, must be read and studied and treated in a certain way. And this also includes the New Testament and the Gospels with parables. Okay, now let's be reminded, again, because this all covers stuff that you learned in English class. Remember about figures of speech. There's the simile, which is comparing 2 objects using words like or as. Then there's hyperbole, which is exaggerated to make a point. And then there's metaphors, which takes 2 objects and uses words like you are or it is. Okay, then there's parables. And we all know what parables are, right? Well, let me tell you if you don't. It's what Jesus used a lot. And it's a short allegory. It's a story, a poem, or a picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. It's usually relating to earthly or natural things that have a deeper spiritual or heavenly meaning with moral or spiritual principles. And now, Jesus used parables for 2 reasons. The first reason was to reveal the truth to those who believed. Okay, and so if he used it to reveal the truth to those to believe, the second one would be to hide the truth from those who wouldn't believe. Okay, now when we go to studying parables, we have to understand about parables. We have to understand that there's rules for reading and interpreting parables. Let me give you 7 rules for interpreting parables. Okay, so rule number 1 is to do not establish a doctrine on parables alone. You can use it to back it up, but don't use it to establish it on it by itself. Number 2, we should seek to understand each parable in the light of Jesus and his kingdom. After all, that's what Jesus was talking about the majority of the time he's using parables, if not all the time. Number 3 is to understand the cultural background of the parables. While we should understand the culture and the background and the history of all the Bible that we're reading, specifically the parables, otherwise we can try to apply something that it means to us in today's age when it was 2,000 years ago, it meant something totally different. Number 4 is to understand that some parables Jesus gives an interpretation, others they interpret themselves. Number 5, we need to compare parables with other parables or other scriptures. Number 6 is to look for one basic central point in each parable, which is usually found in the last sentence of the parable. And number 7 is to avoid allegorizing or spiritualizing the parables unless the parables clearly indicate such meaning. Okay, now let's look at types. And again, this is not like this really intriguing, deep stuff that's on the edge of your seats. This is kind of boring, but this is needful things to know. Okay, types. What is a type? A type is a visible object lesson used to teach an invisible or spiritual truth or to show something to come. And of course, there are guidelines for reading, studying, and interpreting types. Now, let me give you 4 of them. Number 1 is to search the New Testament to find authority to verify that it is a type. Number 2 is to avoid the temptation to be clever and subtle and to find types and shadows in everything. Not everything is a type and shadow. Number 3 is to locate points of similarity and dissimilarity. And number 4 is to do not use types to prove doctrine unless the New Testament gives you authority to do so. They are used more for teaching than for doctrine. And of course, like everything else, there are 6 different types found in Scripture. Number 1 is persons. They're, types used for people. Adam was a type of Christ as the head of the human race. And you can actually find that in 1 Corinthians 15, 20, and 21. Abraham was a type of all who would come to believe and have faith in God and what Jesus was to do. And the second one is institutions. The sacrifices was a type of pointing to the cross. Creation and the promised land are types of the rest believers can enter into during the new birth. And the Passover is a type of redemption. And the third kind is offices. The prophet, the priest, and the king were types for like Moses, Aaron, and David. Jesus walked in all of these roles, and the Old Testament characters were types of him in these roles. Number 4 is events. For example, wilderness wanderings, if you ever heard of that. Number 5 is actions. Lifting up the brazen serpent, in the children of Israel in the desert, was a type of the crucifixion. Many things that the high priest had to do were types of Christ's work that he accomplished either on the earth or when he was crucified, died, and rose again. Hosea's marriage in the Old Testament to a prostitute was a type of God's redeeming love for mankind. And the 6th kind was things. The tabernacle. The tabernacle is a type of the incarnation where the presence of God dwells with man. Okay, moving on to the next kind is history. We're almost done. Hold on, I know this has been long and kind of a little boring. But the last one is history. We must understand that the Bible took place over a span of thousands of years. Each book has its own setting of time and place, and we must have some basic understanding of that time and place to understand what is being said. You can't apply thoughts and ideas from 1 Chronicles to the book of Acts. It just doesn't work. Though they take place in a similar region, it's a totally different time period with different things happening and going on. It may also be helpful for you to understand the secular history of the time. To better understand the time of the captivity, it would be helpful for us to know who the Assyrians are. They weren't good people. It'd be helpful to know how Rome was viewed by Israel and how Israel was viewed by Rome. These things give us clearer insight into what the scriptures actually mean. For example, if we have a clear understanding of the times, when we read the book of Revelations, we'll have an understanding of what these things actually mean that God was talking about. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to stay in touch or get connected, you can find me online at www.chrisadams.com, and there you can find all the different social media networks I am on. Thank you for joining me again, and I will see you back here next time.